A boy from a poor neighborhood trudged home after a long day. An elderly man with silver hair and hunched shoulders was rummaging through a trash bin in the cold wind, searching for food. They didn't know each other, and neither had anything to give. The boy was so poor that his dinner consisted of just a single loaf of bread. But after a few moments of hesitation, he offered it, and decided to do something he wasn't even sure he could do. He brought a stranger home, without knowing that this man was neither nameless nor meaningless, because just a few days later, the boy's life and his mother's would be changed forever. The story begins with a look of compassion and ends with a gift no one could have imagined. Don't look away, because sometimes the one we help is the very person who comes to save our family. Late afternoon. The sky was overcast and cold winds howled through the empty streets of a quiet Chicago suburb. With a worn-out backpack slung over his shoulder, a boy named Micah Evans hurried along after finishing his shift as a kitchen helper at a nearby sandwich shop. He was only 14, skinny, weary, and weathered beyond his years. He lived with his mother in a cramped, run-down one-bedroom apartment on the ground floor. The wind cut sharply into his collar. His stomach growled with hunger, and his whole body ached. All Micah wanted was to get home as fast as he could. But then his eyes stopped. Up ahead, near a dumpster behind the grocery store, a hunched figure was rummaging through a torn plastic bag. An old man, his silver hair matted and wild, his coat so frayed it barely clung to any warmth. His face was deeply wrinkled, his eyes clouded with exhaustion, and his trembling hands were clutching a piece of moldy bread. Micah froze for a few seconds. He bit his lip, a strange mix of emotion rising in his chest. Sorrow, guilt, and fear. I barely have enough to eat myself. How could I help him? He told himself, lowering his head and walking quickly past. His feet felt heavy, but his heart felt heavier. But after a few dozen steps, Micah stopped. The image of the old man still haunted him. He turned around and saw the man still digging through the trash bag, desperately, hopelessly. Micah let out a long sigh. He opened his backpack and pulled out his last sandwich, the dinner his mom had packed for him. He stepped closer and gently said, I don't have much, but here, please eat this, sir." The old man looked up, eyes widening as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. He took the sandwich with trembling hands and whispered, "Thank you. Thank you, child. I'm Edward. I think, I don't quite remember." Micah stood there silently. He didn't know what else to do. But when he saw the old man shivering from the cold, he clenched his jaw and said, "Sir, come home with me. At least there's a warm blanket there." Micah gently supported the old man and began leading him down the narrow alley toward their tiny apartment, where another battle awaited him, convincing his mother. The door to the worn-out apartment creaked as Micah opened it. The small room was dark, dimly lit by a single yellow bulb hanging from the ceiling. He stepped inside first, then gently guided Mr. Edward, the frail, shivering old man, across the threshold. In the kitchen, Laura, Micah's mother, was folding freshly ironed clothes from her part-time housekeeping job. When she saw her son bringing a stranger into the house, she froze. "Micah? Who is this?" Micah pressed his lips together, took a few steps forward. "Mom, this is Mr. Edward. I saw him hungry, cold, and with nowhere to go. I couldn't just leave him out there." Laura stood up sharply, her voice rising. "You couldn't leave him? Micah, what do you think this place is? A hotel? A charity shelter?" "Mom, he has no one. I couldn't ignore it." "Micah," her voice cracked with frustration, "do you realize how poor we are? Every cent goes to food, electricity, rent. I have to count every penny. And now you bring home a complete stranger, someone we don't even know, and expect me to share what little we have left." Micah lowered his head, his chest heavy. But then he looked up, eyes red with emotion, voice steady. "You taught me to be kind. I'm just doing what you taught me." The room fell silent. Laura couldn't find words to respond. Mr. Edward, who had remained quietly by the door, finally spoke, his voice weak but sincere. "I just need one night. Just a place to rest without being chased away." Micah looked at his mother and softly said, "If you won't allow it, I'll let him sleep in the hallway. But I can't leave him outside tonight." Laura let out a long sigh and turned away. A minute passed, but it felt like an hour. Then, without a word, she walked into the kitchen, pulled out a thin blanket, and placed it on the sofa. "You can sleep here, just for one night." Her voice was firm, but her eyes had softened. Micah nodded, eyes misting. "Thank you, Mom." Mr. Edward bowed his head in gratitude. Though he still trembled, he gently unfolded the blanket and lay down, his expression filled with gratitude, as if he had just stepped into a palace. In the corner of the kitchen, Laura stood silently by the window, one hand pressed against her chest. She said nothing, but in her eyes a quiet tear fell. Perhaps it was out of worry, or perhaps because, even in poverty, her heart still had room for kindness. The next morning, faint sunlight filtered through the old curtains. In the kitchen, Laura was preparing a simple breakfast of a few slices of bread and fried eggs. Her face still looked pensive. Perhaps she hadn't slept at all the night before. Micah tiptoed out of his room and peeked toward the sofa where Mr. Edward had been sleeping. But the blanket had already been folded neatly, the pillow placed back in order. "Where is he, Mom?" Micah asked anxiously. Before Laura could answer, the apartment door swung open. Mr. Edward stepped in, holding a large trash bag, beads of sweat on his forehead. His clothes were still old and worn, but they looked a bit cleaner. "I cleaned up all the trash in the hallway," he said quietly but clearly. "The floors are mopped too. I hope I didn't bother anyone." Laura stood still, looking at him. There was something in that thin, frail figure that made it impossible for her to scold him like she had the night before. Micah hurried over, smiling. "You didn't have to do that." Edward gave a gentle smile. "You gave me a place to stay. I have no money, so the least I can do is something to say thank you." From that day on, every morning he woke up early, sweeping the hallway, washing dishes after breakfast, helping Laura fold clothes, even quietly picking up small errands if there was spare change left on the counter. Every time Micah went to work at the nearby sandwich shop, Edward followed. At first the shop owner didn't notice, but soon Edward began wiping tables, taking out trash, folding napkins, unprompted, unpaid. One time a customer dropped their wallet. Edward picked it up and immediately handed it to the manager without hesitation. "I used to be a waiter. At least I think I was." He smiled, his voice a little hoarse. "My hands still remember what my heart has forgotten." Micah looked at him and felt a warmth inside. Even if Edward couldn't recall his past, in every gesture, every glance, there was something deeply familiar. As if, once upon a time, he had lived with a kind of goodness that left a permanent mark. One rainy afternoon, when the restaurant had emptied out, Micah saw Edward quietly drying glasses with a soft towel, his eyes full of reverence. As if each glass held a precious memory he was trying to preserve, in a life that had once been forgotten. That evening, Micah left the sandwich shop later than usual. He and Mr. Edward walked home together in the light drizzle, the dim streetlights casting their long shadows across the damp sidewalk. "Are you tired?" Micah asked, glancing over worriedly as the old man hunched slightly with each step. "Not at all. Every step I take now makes me feel truly alive." Mr. Edward smiled warmly, his eyes quietly sparkling. That simple sentence left Micah in thoughtful silence for the rest of the walk home. The next day, while taking out the trash behind the restaurant, Micah happened to spot a slightly crumpled piece of paper wedged under a cardboard box. He was about to toss it away until the bold letters "Missing Person" made him pause. It was an old flyer. On it was a photo of a middle-aged man with kind eyes. Though his hair was neater, his skin clearer, there was no mistaking. It was Mr. Edward. Below the photo were the words, "Edward Cole, missing for over 3 months. Family is searching. If seen, please contact." Micah froze. He immediately rushed back into the shop, calling for Mr. Edward. When the old man came out, Micah held out the flyer. "Look, this is you, isn't it?" Edward took the flyer, his hands trembling slightly. He stared at the photo as if fighting with his own memory. Suddenly he stepped back, eyes wide, hand to his forehead. I know that place, the White House with the green door, and a maple tree in the yard." His voice cracked. A rainstorm of memories began pouring through the missing pieces. Micah gently placed a hand on his shoulder and said softly, "We'll go there. I'll take you home." That evening, as the two stood at a bus stop in the golden glow of sunset, Mr. Edward held the flyer tightly, his eyes brimming with tears. No words were spoken, but in both their hearts they knew. This wasn't just a ride home. It was a journey back to who he truly was. The bus rolled quietly through the suburban streets, the golden hues of sunset spilling across every window. Micah didn't say a word the entire ride. He only glanced occasionally at Mr. Edward, who was no longer a nameless old man, but a father, a husband, on his way home to the family he had lost. When the bus stopped near the address printed on the flyer, Edward could barely contain himself. He stepped off so quickly he nearly stumbled. Micah caught him just in time, gently squeezing his shoulder. "Easy, sir. We're here." Before them stood a small white house, its front door painted green, just as Edward had described. A large maple tree stood silently in the yard, its fallen leaves scattered across the brick walkway. Edward stopped at the gate, his hand trembling, his eyes locked on the house as if afraid it might vanish into a dream. "I used to sit on that front step, every morning, reading the paper and drinking coffee with my wife," he whispered as if talking to himself. Micah nodded. "Then go ahead and knock." Edward slowly climbed the steps. He raised his hand, but pulled it back again. It took a few more seconds before he found the courage to ring the doorbell. Moments later, the door creaked open. A middle-aged woman stood inside, still holding a kitchen towel. When her eyes met Edward's face, the towel slipped from her hand. Her face went pale, her lips parted, but no sound came. Edward." Edward stood still, tears brimming in his eyes. "I'm sorry, I don't remember why or how I disappeared, but I remember you now." The woman burst into tears and threw her arms around him. Behind her, a young man appeared, frozen in shock. Then he ran forward, embracing them both, the mother and the father he thought was lost, and all emotions spilled out in a storm of sobs. From a distance, Micah stood quietly, clutching the strap of his backpack. He watched the scene unfold with a strange feeling swelling in his chest. Not regret, not envy, but a warmth he had never known. At that moment, Edward looked up at him, tears still glistening at the corners of his eyes, but his smile was radiant. "Micah, thank you, for believing in an old man who had nothing." Micah smiled, his own eyes misty. "No, you're the one who taught me to believe in good again." A week after that tearful reunion, the morning in Micah and his mother, Laura's old apartment, began as usual. A simple pot of oatmeal, the crackling hum of the radio by the window, and the wind slipping in through the thin cracks in the door. But today, something felt different. Laura was folding a stack of freshly ironed shirts when there was a knock at the door. Micah went to open it, and standing there was a well-dressed man, William, Edward's son. Behind him, a sleek black car sat quietly in the pothole-lined alley, elegant but not flashy. "I'm sorry for not calling ahead," William said gently. "My father and we have something we'd like to say to your family." Laura looked slightly flustered, and Micah was clearly confused. But just a few minutes later, they were all seated around the rickety wooden dining table, sipping hot tea, made from the last few leaves Laura had left in the tin. William began, his tone calm and respectful. "I've heard everything from my father, from when he was lost to the moment Micah brought him back. I truly don't think he would have survived if Micah had just walked on by that day. Edward smiled softly, his face now brighter and full of life. He placed his hand over Micah's. You didn't just save my life. You gave me shelter, a blanket, and a reason to live again. William pulled out an envelope and placed it on the table. This is a full scholarship, not just for high school, but college too if Micah chooses. We'll cover every expense. Nothing needs to be paid back. Micah's eyes widened. His mouth opened, but no words came out. William continued, this time turning toward Laura, who was still stunned and emotional. You were the one who opened your home to my father, even when you were struggling. My company is currently looking to fill a part-time warehouse supervisor position. Stable pay, full benefits. If you'd like it, the job is yours. Laura raised her hand to her mouth, eyes welling with tears. Any hesitations, any polite refusals she might have offered, were swept away by the overwhelming kindness filling the tiny room. As for Micah, he could only turn and look at Mr. Edward Dash, who was no longer the old man scavenging through garbage bins, but someone who had brought back the greatest gift of all, in a way no one could have ever expected. Edward leaned in and whispered, You pulled me out of the dark, Micah. Now it's time for me to help you step into the light. Some gifts don't come in boxes or wrapped with ribbons. They come from gratitude, from tearful embraces, and from silent opportunities that open, all because of one small act, done at the right time. Micah wasn't wealthy. He was just a poor boy on a cold street. But he was rich in kindness. And it was that very kindness that led him and his mother out of life's shadows, by a path no one could have predicted. Mr. Edward may have lost his memory, but those who treated him with compassion, he would never forget. And perhaps we should remember this too. Not everyone in need is a burden. Sometimes they are the ones sent to change our lives forever. If you believe there's still room for kindness in this world, then subscribe to our channel to help us share stories that warm the heart. Tap the notification bell so you won't miss the next journey, where even the smallest characters carry the biggest lessons. Thank you for watching, and thank you for choosing to believe in the good.